The dust from the stagecoach lingered in the air as it disappeared over the horizon, leaving behind nothing but a lone figure on the road to Redemption Creek. Whiskey Larson stood alone, her once fine dress torn and soiled, her face streaked with tears and dirt. The year was 1876, and the promise of a new life in the West had crumbled before she could even begin. The setting sun painted the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and purples as Whiskey pulled her tattered shawl closer around her shoulders, her honey blonde hair matted with sweat and grime. The stagecoach driver had unceremoniously deposited her and her single trunk at the crossroads when she admitted she couldn't pay the full fare to town. Now, with night approaching and wolves howling in the distance, she found herself utterly alone. The sound of hoofbeats made her heart leap. A rider approached from the east, his silhouette growing larger against the fading light. Whiskey hesitated, torn between hope for assistance and fear of who might be approaching. In these parts, a woman alone was vulnerable, and she had already learned that lesson the hard way. The rider slowed his horse as he neared. He sat tall in the saddle, his broad shoulders outlined against the darkening sky. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, but as he drew closer, Whiskey could make out a strong jawline covered with several days' worth of stubble. "Evening, madam," he called, his voice deep and smooth as river stones. "Seems like an odd place to be waiting." "I wasn't waiting," Whiskey replied defensively. "I was abandoned." The man dismounted with fluid grace, keeping a respectful distance. His horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, pawed at the ground impatiently. "Name's Preston Hayes," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Folks call me Prees. Ranch is about 5 miles north of here." He gestured with a gloved hand. "Town's another 8 miles east. Were you heading to Redemption Creek?" Whiskey nodded, trying to maintain her composure despite her dire circumstances. "I was. I'm to be the new school teacher." Preston Hayes looked her over, taking in her disheveled appearance without judgment. "School ain't expecting you until next week, from what I heard at the general store." "I came early," she said, lifting her chin. "I wanted to settle in before the term began." A coyote's call pierced the growing darkness, causing Whiskey to flinch. Preston seemed to make a decision. "Can't leave you out here, not with night coming on." He moved toward her trunk. "I can take you to town if you'd like, or offer you a place at the ranch until morning. My housekeeper, Mrs. Oakes, is there. You'd be proper." Whiskey stiffened. "I don't need your charity, Mr. Hayes." "Not charity, madam, common decency." He hefted her trunk with ease. "And out here, decency can be the difference between living and dying." The stark truth of his words cut through her pride. With limited options and the night growing colder, Whiskey reluctantly nodded. "Very well. To town, please." Preston secured her trunk to his horse and offered his hand to help her mount. Whiskey hesitated, then stepped back. "I'm filthy," she said, her voice breaking. "The journey was difficult." Preston's eyes, a startling shade of blue in his weathered face, met hers. "Dirt washes off, madam. Pride's harder to recover once it's gone." With those words, he gently took her arm and helped her onto his horse before mounting behind her. As they set off toward Redemption Creek, Whiskey sat rigid, acutely aware of the strong arms that reached around her to hold the reins. The town appeared on the horizon, a collection of wooden buildings with light spilling from windows into the night. As they approached, Whiskey could make out a saloon, general store, and what appeared to be a small hotel. "Schoolhouse is on the other side of town," Preston informed her. "Teachers' quarters are attached to the back." "How do you know that?" Whiskey asked, curiosity momentarily overriding her discomfort. "My sister taught there for a spell before she married and moved to Denver." They rode down the main street, drawing curious glances from the few people still out at this hour. Preston guided his horse to a modest two-story building with a sign that read Redemption Creek Hotel and Boarding House. He dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. When Whiskey hesitated again, he looked up at her with understanding in his eyes. "Town's got a bathhouse," he said quietly. "I'll arrange everything. No one needs to see you like this if it troubles you." His unexpected kindness brought fresh tears to her eyes. Whiskey nodded mutely, allowing him to help her down. Her legs were stiff from the long journey, and she stumbled slightly as her feet touched the ground. Preston steadied her with a firm hand on her elbow. "Wait here," he instructed, tying his horse to the hitching post. He disappeared into the hotel, returning moments later with a gray-haired woman in tow. "This is Mrs. Wilson," Preston explained. "She runs the boarding house. She'll get you settled." The older woman approached with a warm smile. "Come, dear, we'll use the back entrance. I've got a room ready and I'll have hot water brought up right away." Whiskey looked from Mrs. Wilson to Preston, who was already untying her trunk. I don't have much money," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "School board covers your first week's lodging, Mrs. Wilson assured her. "Now come along before you catch your death in this night air." Preston carried her trunk to the back entrance, setting it down just inside the door. "I'll be back tomorrow to take you to the schoolhouse if you'd like," he offered. Before Whiskey could respond, Mrs. Wilson answered for her. "That would be most helpful, Mr. Hayes. Say around 10, he nodded, touching the brim of his hat once more. "Madam," he said, addressing Whiskey. "Rest well." As he turned to leave, Whiskey found her voice. "Mr. Hayes," she called softly. When he turned back, she struggled to find the right words. "Thank you." A slight smile curved his lips, transforming his solemn face. "Welcome to Redemption Creek, Miss Larson," she supplied. "Whiskey Larson." His eyebrows rose slightly at her unusual name, but he made no comment. With a final nod, he mounted his horse and rode back into the night. Mrs. Wilson led Whiskey through a narrow hallway to a small but clean room on the second floor. True to her word, hot water was soon delivered, filling a copper tub behind a folding screen. "There's soap and towels," the older woman said. "And I've laid out a nightgown. It's one of mine, so it might be a bit large, but it's clean. We can see about your things in the morning." When Mrs. Wilson had gone, Whiskey sank into the hot bath with a sigh of relief. As she scrubbed away the grime of travel, she allowed herself to think about the cowboy who had come to her rescue. Preston Hayes with his direct blue gaze and quiet strength. She had not expected kindness from a stranger, not after what she had endured to get here. Whiskey closed her eyes, letting the warm water soothe her aching muscles. For the first time in days, she felt safe. Morning brought sunshine streaming through the small window of Whiskey's room. She awoke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous evening came rushing back. She dressed in the cleanest of her travel-worn clothes, a simple navy skirt and white blouse, and made her way downstairs. Mrs. Wilson was in the small dining room, serving breakfast to the handful of other boarders. She greeted Whiskey with a smile and ushered her to a table. "Mr. Hayes left this for you," she said, handing Whiskey an envelope. Inside was $15 and a brief note. "For necessities until your first wages. Not charity in advance from the school board. P.H." Whiskey stared at the money, torn between relief and suspicion. Was it truly from the school board? Or was this Preston Hayes's way of helping without wounding her pride? Her thoughts were interrupted by Mrs. Wilson placing a plate of eggs and toast before her. "Eat up, dear. Mr. Hayes will be here soon to show you the schoolhouse." As if on cue, there was a knock at the front door. Mrs. Wilson hurried to answer it, returning moments later with Preston Hayes in tow. In the daylight, Whiskey could see him clearly for the first time. He was tall, with broad shoulders tapering to a lean waist, his brown hair touched with gold where the sun hit it. His face was tanned from long days outdoors, with laugh lines around his eyes despite his serious expression. "Miss Larson," he greeted her, removing his hat. "I trust you slept well." "I did, thank you," Whiskey gestured to the envelope. "And thank you for this, though I'm not sure I should accept." "It's standard procedure," he assured her, though something in his eyes made her doubt the truth of his statement. "The school board likes to make sure new teachers can get settled properly." Before she could question him further, Mrs. Wilson interjected. "Mr. Hayes, have you had breakfast? I can fix you a plate." "Thank you, madam, but I ate at dawn." He turned back to Whiskey. "Whenever you're ready, I can take you to see the schoolhouse." Whiskey finished her breakfast quickly, eager to see what would be her new workplace and home. Mrs. Wilson pressed a basket into her hands as they were leaving. "Lunch," she explained, "and some basics for your pantry. The general store's just down the street for anything else you might need." The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a sturdy wooden building painted white with a small bell tower. Behind it was a modest cottage that would serve as Whiskey's quarters. Preston unlocked the door to the schoolhouse first, allowing her to step inside. The room was clean and bright, with rows of desks facing a larger desk at the front. A blackboard covered the wall behind the teacher's desk, and bookshelves lined another wall. "It's not fancy," Preston said, watching her reaction, "but it's solid. My sister always said it had good bones." Whiskey walked between the rows of desks, running her fingers along the smooth wood. "It's perfect," she said softly. After the hardships of her journey, the simple, orderly classroom felt like a promise of stability. Preston showed her the small supply closet with chalk, primers, and other teaching materials, then led her to the cottage at the back. It consisted of a front room with a stone fireplace, a tiny kitchen, and a bedroom just large enough for a bed and dresser. "It's humble," he said, almost apologetically. "It's mine," Whiskey replied, unable to keep the wonder from her voice. After years of living under her uncle's roof, enduring his cruelty and eventually fleeing his plans to marry her off to settle a gambling debt, this small cottage represented freedom. Preston watched her, a question in his eyes that he didn't voice. Instead, he said, "Town council meets tonight at 7 in the church hall. They'll want to meet the new teacher. I can escort you if you'd like." Whiskey hesitated, thinking of her limited wardrobe. "I should visit the general store first." "I'll take you there next," Preston offered. "Then I need to head back to the ranch. I've got cattle that won't move themselves." At the general store, Preston introduced her to the proprietor, Mr. Daniels, a round man with spectacles and a friendly smile. "Put whatever Miss Larson needs on my account," Preston instructed. "The school board will settle it at the end of the month." When Mr. Daniels had moved away to help another customer, Whiskey turned to Preston with narrowed eyes. "Are you the school board, Mr. Hayes?" A flush crept up his neck. "I'm on it," he admitted. "Along with Reverend Thomas, Dr. Morgan, and Mrs. Holbrook, who runs the millinery shop." "I see." Whiskey studied him. "And do you always go to such lengths for new teachers?" "Only the ones I find stranded on the road at sunset," he replied with the hint of a smile. Whiskey couldn't help but smile in return. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Hayes. I won't forget it." "Preston," he corrected her. "Or Prees if you prefer. We're not much for formality in Redemption Creek." "Whiskey then," she offered in return. "Though I should warn you, it's not a family name or a nickname. My mother was." "Unconventional. It suits you," he said simply. "I'll see you at the council meeting tonight, Whiskey." After he left, Whiskey selected a few necessities: a new dress in a practical brown that wouldn't show dirt, undergarments, toiletries, and some basic foodstuffs. Mr. Daniels arranged to have everything delivered to her cottage. Back in her new home, Whiskey spent the afternoon cleaning and arranging her belongings. The cottage had been well maintained, but it had been empty for some time. By late afternoon, she had transformed it into a cozy haven. She bathed using water heated on the small stove, then dressed in her new brown dress, which fit her slender frame perfectly. As she brushed her long blonde hair, now clean and shining, she thought about Preston Hayes. There was something compelling about him, a quiet strength that drew her despite her determination to maintain her independence. After what she had escaped in St. Louis, Whiskey had promised herself she would never be dependent on a man again. Yet here she was, already indebted to one. A knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Preston standing there, hat in hand, dressed in clean clothes though still unmistakably a working rancher. "Ready?" he asked. The church hall was already filled with townsfolk when they arrived. Preston guided her through the crowd, introducing her to what seemed like half the town. Whiskey smiled and shook hands, trying to remember names and faces. The formal meeting began with Reverend Thomas calling everyone to order. Each member of the school board welcomed her, and then townspeople were invited to ask questions. Most were practical inquiries about her teaching experience and plans for the school term. Then a stern-faced woman in a severe black dress stood. "Miss Larson, what brings you all the way from St. Louis to our little town? Surely there were teaching positions available in Missouri." Whiskey felt her heart race. She had prepared for this question, but it still unsettled her. "I wanted adventure," she said with a forced smile, "and the opportunity to help shape a growing community." The woman looked skeptical but sat down. Whiskey could feel Preston's gaze on her but didn't meet his eyes. After the meeting, as people mingled and enjoyed refreshments, Preston brought her a cup of punch. "You did well," he said quietly. "They seem like good people," Whiskey replied, looking around the room. "They are, for the most part. That was Mrs. Pemberton who questioned you. Her husband owns the bank. She considers herself the moral guardian of Redemption Creek." Whiskey tensed. "Should I be concerned?" "Not if you're as good a teacher as I suspect you are." His eyes, blue as Montana skies, held hers. "Are you running from something, Whiskey Larson?" She looked away. "Aren't we all in one way or another?" Before he could respond, they were interrupted by a young woman with auburn hair and a friendly smile. "Mr. Hayes, you're monopolizing our new teacher," she chided playfully. "I'm Violet Morgan, the doctor's daughter. I'll be assisting you with the younger children this term." Whiskey welcomed the interruption, chatting with Violet about the upcoming school year. By the time they finished their conversation, Preston had been pulled away by other townspeople. The evening wound down, and Whiskey found herself genuinely enjoying the company of her new neighbors. As people began to leave, Preston appeared at her side once more. "May I walk you home?" he asked. The night air was cool as they walked the short distance to her cottage. Stars blanketed the sky, more than Whiskey had ever seen in St. Louis. "It's beautiful here," she said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "It can be harsh too," Preston warned. "Winters are long and hard. Summers can bring drought. It takes a certain kind of person to make it in Montana territory." "Are you warning me away, Mr. Hayes?" Whiskey asked, a challenge in her voice. "Just preparing you." They stopped at her door. "I grew up here. I've seen city folk come with dreams of a fresh start, only to turn tail at the first blizzard or Indian scare." "I'm not so easily frightened," Whiskey assured him, though in truth, she had no idea if she could withstand the challenges he described. She only knew she couldn't go back. Preston studied her face in the moonlight. "No, I don't believe you are." He hesitated, then added, "I'll be busy at the ranch for the next few days, but if you need anything, send word with Harry at the livery. He comes out our way daily." "I'll be fine," Whiskey said. "I have a week to prepare before the children arrive." "Good night, then, Miss Larson." Preston touched his hat and turned to leave. "Whiskey," she reminded him. "And thank you again, Preston." He looked back, a smile transforming his serious face. "Sleep well, Whiskey." The days leading up to the start of school passed in a blur of preparation. Whiskey cleaned the schoolhouse from top to bottom, organized textbooks, and planned lessons. Violet Morgan visited daily, helping and offering insights about the 30 children who would soon be in Whiskey's care. "The Barton twins are troublemakers," Violet warned. "And little Sarah Jenkins is painfully shy. Oh, and the Cooper children, there are 4 of them, they're Preston's nieces and nephews." Whiskey looked up from the primer she was examining. "Preston has siblings here, just his brother William. He's foreman at the Hayes Ranch. Their sister, the one who taught here before, moved to Denver 2 years ago." Whiskey found herself storing away these details about Preston's family, though she told herself it was simply good to know about her students' backgrounds. On Sunday, she attended services at the small white church where Reverend Thomas preached about new beginnings. Whiskey sat near the back, conscious of the curious glances still directed her way. As the congregation filed out after the service, she found herself face to face with Mrs. Pemberton. "Miss Larson," the older woman said with a tight smile, "I trust you're settling in well." "Very well, thank you," Whiskey replied politely. "I notice Mr. Hayes has taken quite an interest in your welfare." Mrs. Pemberton's eyes were sharp. "He's a good man, but he has responsibilities. A ranch to run. He doesn't need distractions." Whiskey felt her cheeks flush with anger. "I assure you, Mrs. Pemberton, I have no intention of distracting anyone from their duties. I'm here to teach." "Of course." The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I just thought I should mention it since you're new to our ways. Small towns talk, you understand." Before Whiskey could respond, Violet appeared at her side. "Miss Larson, my parents would love for you to join us for Sunday dinner." Grateful for the rescue, Whiskey accepted the invitation, leaving Mrs. Pemberton with a curt nod. "Don't mind her," Violet whispered as they walked away. "She's been trying to match her daughter with Preston for years." "I'm not interested in Preston Hayes," Whiskey insisted too quickly. Violet's knowing smile made Whiskey's blush deepen. "Of course not. Though half the unmarried women in the county would disagree with your lack of interest. Preston's quite a catch, owns the largest ranch in the area, sits on the town council, and isn't hard on the eyes either." "Violet!" Whiskey exclaimed, scandalized yet amused by her new friend's frankness. Dinner with the Morgans was pleasant, with Dr. Morgan sharing stories of the town's early days and Mrs. Morgan offering practical advice about managing through the coming winter. By the time Whiskey walked back to her cottage, the sun was setting, painting the sky in vivid colors. As she approached her home, she was surprised to see a figure on her porch. Preston stood as she neared, holding a package wrapped in brown paper. "I didn't see you at church," Whiskey said by way of greeting. "I attended early service, had to get back to the ranch." He held out the package. "This came for you yesterday. Town messenger brought it out to the ranch by mistake." Whiskey took the package, recognizing her uncle's handwriting on the label. Her blood ran cold. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Preston's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing her distress. "Bad news." "No," she lied. "Just unexpected." He clearly didn't believe her but didn't press. Instead, he changed the subject. Excited for tomorrow, first day of school, Whiskey seized on the new topic. "Nervous, actually. 30 children is more than I've taught before. You'll do fine, Preston assured her. Children here are eager to learn, most of them anyway. He smiled, and Whiskey found herself relaxing despite the package in her hands. Violet tells me 4 of them are your nieces and nephews, she said. That's right, William's kids. Good children, though the youngest, Emma, can be a handful. Takes after her uncle, I'm told. Whiskey found herself smiling at the thought of Preston as a mischievous child. It was hard to imagine, given his serious demeanor. Will I see you tomorrow? She asked, immediately regretting the question that revealed more interest than she intended to show. If Preston noticed, he didn't let on. I'll be bringing the children into town. William's wife is expecting again, confined to bed rest. I look forward to meeting them. Whiskey fidgeted with the package, anxious to open it in private. Preston took the hint. I should head back. Got an early start tomorrow. He hesitated, then added, whatever's in that package, remember you're not alone here, Whiskey. His perception unsettled her. Good night, Preston, she said, more curtly than she intended. Once inside, Whiskey placed the package on her small table and stared at it for a long moment before working up the courage to open it. Inside was a letter and a small revolver. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. Whiskey, it began in her uncle's flowing script. You can run, but you can't hide forever. Henson wants what I promised him you. He's a patient man, but his patience will run out. The gun is for your protection until we find you, and we will find you. Your loving uncle, Edmund. Whiskey sank into a chair, the letter falling from her numb fingers. Her uncle had found her, or at least, he knew enough to send this warning. The gun was his way of toying with her, providing protection against a threat he himself had created. She had been naive to think she could simply disappear, start a new life without consequences. Henson, the man her uncle had planned to marry her to in order to clear his gambling debts, was not someone who gave up easily. As her uncle's letter indicated, it was only a matter of time before they tracked her to Redemption Creek. Whiskey sat in the gathering darkness, weighing her options. She could run again, but to where? And how far could she get with her limited funds? Or she could stay and face whatever came, hoping that the community she was just beginning to know would stand with her. Her thoughts turned to Preston Hayes. There was something solid about him, a steadiness that made her believe he could be trusted. But would he still look at her with those kind blue eyes if he knew the truth about why she had fled? Sent Louis. With no answers forthcoming, Whiskey eventually prepared for bed. Tomorrow would bring 30 children looking to her for guidance. Whatever her personal troubles, she had a responsibility to them now. She placed the revolver in her bedside drawer, a troubling reminder of the past she couldn't seem to escape. The schoolhouse buzzed with excitement as children took their seats on that first Monday morning. Whiskey stood at the front, outwardly calm though her stomach churned with nerves. Violet sat to one side, ready to assist with the youngest pupils. As Whiskey called roll, she matched names to faces, noting the 4 Cooper children among them. The oldest, a serious boy of 12 named James, had Preston's blue eyes. His siblings 10-year-old Matthew, 8-year-old Sarah, and 6-year-old Emma shared the family resemblance to varying degrees. The day passed in a whirlwind of introductions, assessments, and establishing routines. By the time the final bell rang, Whiskey was exhausted but exhilarated. These children, with their eager faces and curious minds, gave her purpose. For their sakes, she would find a way to deal with the threat from her past. As the students filed out, Preston appeared in the doorway. He greeted each child by name, ruffling hair and asking about their day as they passed. When the Cooper children reached him, little Emma launched herself into his arms. "Uncle, please. Miss Larson let me read from the big book all by myself. Preston swung her around, his usually serious face alight with affection. "Did she now? That's mighty impressive for a squirt like you." Watching this interaction, Whiskey felt something shift inside her. This was a side of Preston Hayes she hadn't seen, playful, openly affectionate. It softened the edges of her wariness. After the children had gone, Preston approached her desk. "Survived your first day, I see." "Barely," Whiskey admitted with a smile. "They're wonderful but exhausting, like most worthwhile things." He leaned against her desk, casual yet somehow still maintaining that air of quiet strength. "I noticed Emma took to you right away. She's usually shy with strangers." "Children are often better judges of character than adults," Whiskey said. "They haven't learned to hide their feelings or pretend to be something they're not." Preston studied her face, speaking from experience. "Perhaps." Whiskey began gathering her papers, uncomfortable under his perceptive gaze. "I came to invite you to dinner at the ranch this Saturday," Preston said, changing the subject. "William and Clara, that's my brother and his wife, would like to meet their children's teacher properly. And frankly, Clara's going stir-crazy confined to the house. Visitors are a welcome distraction." Whiskey hesitated. The invitation was innocent enough, but accepting meant deepening her connection to Preston and his family. If when her uncle and Henson caught up with her, those connections would only complicate matters. "I'm not sure that would be appropriate," she said finally. Preston's eyebrows rose. "Mrs. Pemberton got to you, didn't she? Let me guess, she warned you about getting too friendly with the local rancher." "Something like that," Whiskey admitted. "And you're worried about your reputation." "It wasn't a question." "I'm worried about many things, Mr. Hayes," Whiskey replied, more sharply than she intended. "My reputation is just one of them." Preston straightened, his expression closing. "Of course, forgive my presumption." He reached for his hat. "The invitation stands should you change your mind. Clara would welcome the company, regardless of what the town gossips might say." As he turned to leave, Whiskey was struck by the realization that she had hurt him. Despite her determination to keep him at arm's length, that knowledge bothered her more than it should. "Preston," she called as he reached the door. When he looked back, she said, "Thank you for the invitation. Perhaps another time when I'm more settled." He nodded once, his expression unreadable, and left. The week passed in a blur of lessons and adjustments to her new role. Whiskey threw herself into teaching, staying late at the schoolhouse to prepare for the following day, and falling into bed exhausted each night. She told herself it was dedication to her pupils, not avoidance of her personal problems, that drove her. On Friday afternoon, as she was erasing the blackboard after the children had gone, she heard the door open behind her. Expecting Violet, who often stayed to help, she turned with a smile that froze when she saw who stood there. "Miss Larson," Mrs. Pemberton said, her voice crisp. "I hoped we might have a word." Whiskey set down the eraser, wiping chalk dust from her hands. "Of course, Mrs. Pemberton. What can I do for you?" The older woman stepped further into the room, her gaze sweeping critically over the neat rows of desks and colorful alphabet charts Whiskey had hung on the walls. "I understand Preston Hayes invited you to dinner at his ranch." Whiskey stiffened. "News travels fast in Redemption Creek." "It's a small town," Mrs. Pemberton replied with a thin smile. "People notice things. Like a young, unmarried woman spending time alone with one of the most eligible bachelors in the county." "We weren't alone," Whiskey pointed out. "We were in a schoolhouse full of children." "But you would have been, had you accepted his dinner invitation." Mrs. Pemberton moved closer, her voice lowering conspiratorially. "I'm only looking out for your interests, my dear. A new teacher needs to establish herself as above reproach, especially one with unusual circumstances." Whiskey's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean by that? Only that you arrived rather unexpectedly, with no references except those sent by post. And there's the matter of your unusual name, your reluctance to discuss your family. Mrs. Pemberton waved a hand dismissively. People wonder, that's all. I was hired by the school board, Whiskey said firmly. If they had concerns about my qualifications, they should have raised them before offering me the position. The school board, yes. Mrs. Pemberton's smile took on a knowing edge. Preston was quite insistent about hiring you despite the gaps in your application. One wonders why. The implication was clear, and Whiskey felt anger rise in her chest. Mr. Hayes had never met me before I arrived in Redemption Creek. Any interest he took in my application would have been professional. Perhaps, Mrs. Pemberton conceded. But now that he has met you, his interest seems to have evolved. I merely suggest you consider the potential consequences to your reputation and position here. Before Whiskey could respond, the schoolhouse door opened again and Violet entered, stopping short when she saw Mrs. Pemberton. "Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, looking between the two women with concern. "Not at all, Miss Morgan," Mrs. Pemberton said smoothly. "I was just leaving." "Good day, Miss Larson. Consider what I've said." After she left, Violet turned to Whiskey with wide eyes. "What was that about?" Whiskey sighed, sinking into her chair. "Apparently, Preston Hayes is off limits if I want to maintain my respectability in this town." Violet rolled her eyes. "Mrs. Pemberton has been trying to match Preston with her daughter Catherine for years. She'd warn off any woman who caught his eye." "I haven't caught his eye," Whiskey protested. "He was being neighborly, that's all. If you say so." Violet's skeptical tone made Whiskey flush. "For what it's worth, Preston doesn't pay special attention to just anyone. He's always been selective about who he lets close." Whiskey didn't know how to respond to that, so she changed the subject. "Help me finish putting these primers away." Later that evening, as Whiskey prepared a simple supper in her cottage, a knock came at her door. She opened it to find young Emma Cooper on her porch, clutching a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Emma, what are you doing here alone?" Whiskey looked past the child, expecting to see an adult nearby. "Uncle Prees is at the general store," Emma explained. "He said I could run over and give you this while he's settled up with Mr. Daniels." She thrust the package forward. "It's from Aunt Clara. She said to tell you she's sorry you can't come to dinner tomorrow, but maybe you can come another time." Whiskey accepted the package, touched by the thoughtfulness of a woman she had never met. "Thank you, Emma. That's very kind of your aunt. She makes the best apple tarts in the whole territory," Emma confided. "That's what she sent you. Uncle Prees said you might be lonely being new and all." "Did he?" Whiskey asked softly. Emma nodded enthusiastically. "He talks about you a lot, says you're smart as a whip and pretty as a picture." "Emma Cooper, are you pestering Miss Larson?" Preston's deep voice came from the street. He approached the porch, a slight flush visible on his cheeks, suggesting he had overheard his niece's last comment. "I'm not pestering. I'm delivering," Emma insisted. "And I told her what you said about her being pretty." Preston's flush deepened. "Emma, there are some things gentlemen say in private that aren't meant to be repeated." Whiskey couldn't help but smile at his discomfort. "Thank you for the delivery, Emma, and please thank your aunt for me." "Why don't you thank her yourself tomorrow?" Emma asked. "You could still come to dinner." "Emma," Preston warned. "What?" "Mama says Miss Larson probably said no because she's being proper, but proper is boring and she should come anyway because you. "That's enough, squirt," Preston interrupted, scooping her up. "Time to head home. Say goodbye to Miss Larson." "Goodbye, Miss Larson," Emma said dutifully, then added in a stage whisper, "You should come tomorrow. Uncle Prees makes the best biscuits." As Preston carried her away, Whiskey called after them, "Mr. Hayes." He turned, Emma still in his arms. "Miss Larson, what time should I arrive tomorrow?" The smile that spread across his face was worth whatever gossip might follow. 4 o'clock. I'll send the wagon for you." True to his word, a wagon arrived at Whiskey's cottage the following afternoon. To her surprise, it was driven not by Preston but by a middle-aged man with a weather-beaten face and kind eyes. "Miss Larson, I'm Hank, foreman at the Hayes Ranch," he introduced himself. "Mr. Hayes asked me to fetch you." The ride to the ranch took nearly an hour, giving Whiskey time to admire the landscape. The rolling hills were dotted with cattle, and in the distance, the mountains rose majestically against the sky. The Hayes Ranch was larger than Whiskey had imagined, a sprawling main house of hewn logs with several outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn. As the wagon pulled up to the house, the front door opened, and Preston emerged, wiping his hands on a towel. "Right on time," he called to Hank, then turned his smile to Whiskey. "Clara's been counting the minutes. Fair warning, she'll talk your ear off after being confined to bed for weeks." He helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and sure at her waist. Whiskey was acutely aware of his touch, brief though it was. Inside, the house was surprisingly elegant, with polished wood floors, comfortable furniture, and curtains at the windows. Preston led her to a bedroom where a petite woman with auburn hair sat propped up in bed, a quilt covering her swollen belly. "Clara, this is Miss Whiskey Larson," Preston introduced. "Whiskey, my sister-in-law, Clara Cooper Hayes." "Please call me Whiskey," she said, taking the hand Clara extended. "Only if you'll call me Clara," the other woman replied with a warm smile. "I've heard so much about you from the children and from Preston." Preston cleared his throat. "I'll check on dinner. William should be in soon." He left the room, closing the door behind him. Clara patted the edge of the bed. "Sit, please. I'm starved for company that doesn't have mud on their boots or lessons to recite." Whiskey sat, immediately at ease with Preston's sister-in-law. They chatted about the school, the children, and life in Redemption Creek. Clara was forthright and funny, with none of the reserve Whiskey had come to expect from the townspeople. "Preston tells me you came from St. Louis," Clara said after a while. "That's quite a change." "It is," Whiskey agreed cautiously. Clara seemed to sense her reluctance to elaborate. "Well, I came from Boston myself 5 years ago. Talk about culture shock. I'd never seen a cow up close before I married William." "How did you meet?" Whiskey asked, grateful for the shift in focus. "He came east on business selling cattle to some Boston merchants. We met at a social my father hosted. 6 weeks later we were married and I was on my way to Montana Territory." Clara laughed. "My mother thought I'd lost my mind." "Were you afraid?" Whiskey couldn't help asking. "To leave everything familiar behind," Clara considered the question seriously. "Terrified," she admitted, "but also exhilarated. There's something freeing about starting fresh, isn't there? Becoming the person you want to be rather than the one others expect." Whiskey nodded, struck by how accurately Clara had captured her own feelings. "Yes, exactly." The bedroom door opened, and a tall man who bore a striking resemblance to Preston entered. Where Preston was lean and weathered by the sun, William Hayes was broader, with the same blue eyes but a more open countenance. "So you're the teacher who's got my children reciting poetry at the dinner table," he said with a grin, extending his hand. "William Hayes, welcome to our home." Dinner was a lively affair, served in Clara's bedroom so she could join them. The Cooper children peppered Whiskey with questions and stories, while William and Preston discussed ranch business. It was the most relaxed Whiskey had felt since arriving in Redemption Creek. After the meal, as the sun began to set, Preston suggested a walk to show Whiskey the ranch. They strolled through the corrals and past the barn where ranch hands tipped their hats respectfully. "Your brother seems happy," Whiskey observed. "Clara, too, despite being confined to bed." "They are," Preston agreed. "Took William a while to find the right woman, but once he did." He trailed off, looking toward the mountains. "A good marriage is rare. My parents had one, so do William and Clara." "And you?" Whiskey asked before she could stop herself. "No suitable women in Redemption Creek for Preston Hayes." He glanced at her, a half-smile playing at his lips. "I've been busy building the ranch, and maybe I'm particular. Mrs. Pemberton seems to think her daughter would be suitable," Whiskey said, immediately regretting bringing up the woman's name. Preston's expression darkened. "Catherine Pemberton is a fine young woman, but we would make each other miserable." He stopped walking, turning to face Whiskey directly. "Mrs. Pemberton spoke to you about me, didn't she? That's why you initially declined the dinner invitation." Whiskey nodded reluctantly. "She implied that spending time with you would damage my reputation." "And yet here you are," Preston observed, his eyes searching her face. "Here I am," Whiskey confirmed softly. "Perhaps I'm not as concerned with my reputation as Mrs. Pemberton thinks I should be." Something flickered in Preston's eyes, surprise, followed by a warmth that made Whiskey's heart beat faster. Before he could respond, however, they were interrupted by a shout from the house. William stood on the porch, waving urgently. "Preston, Ryder coming in fast, it's Ben from town." Preston's expression immediately shifted to concern. "Excuse me," he said to Whiskey, already striding toward the house. She followed more slowly, a sense of foreboding growing with each step. By the time she reached the porch, Preston was deep in conversation with a dust-covered young man on a lathered horse. "When?" Preston was asking, his voice tense. "This afternoon," the rider replied. "Sheriff found him at the hotel, asking questions about the new schoolteacher. Got suspicious when the man couldn't say how he knew her." Whiskey's blood ran cold. She knew without being told who the stranger was. Her uncle had found her sooner than she'd expected. Preston turned, seeing her standing there. His expression was grim. "Whiskey, there's a man in town looking for you. Says he's your uncle." "Edmund Larson," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "He's my guardian. Or was, until I turned 18 last spring. He claims you ran away, that he's concerned for your welfare," Preston said, watching her reaction carefully. "Is he alone?" Whiskey asked, ignoring his implied question. Preston's eyes narrowed at her evasion. "Far as we know. Sheriff's keeping an eye on him." Whiskey nodded, mind racing. If her uncle was alone, perhaps Henson hadn't come with him, but that was unlikely to last. She needed to leave Redemption Creek immediately. "I should return to town," she said, working to keep her voice even. "If my uncle is concerned, I should speak with him." "I'll take you," Preston said firmly. "William, have Hank prepare the buckboard." While they waited for the wagon to be readied, Whiskey said her goodbyes to Clara and the children, trying to act as though this was a normal end to their evening. But as she and Preston rode back toward town in tense silence, she knew everything had changed. "Are you going to tell me what's really going on?" Preston finally asked, his voice quiet in the gathering darkness. Whiskey stared straight ahead. "It's complicated." "Most things worth understanding are," he replied. When she remained silent, he added, "I can't help if I don't know what we're facing." The "we" caught her attention. "This isn't your problem, Preston." "It became my problem the moment a stranger rode into my town asking about you with ill intent," he said firmly. "I can see it in your face, Whiskey. You're afraid of him." She couldn't deny it. "Yes," she admitted, "but not for the reasons you might think. My uncle isn't physically abusive. He's manipulative, controlling, and," Preston prompted gently. Whiskey took a deep breath. And he promised me in marriage to a man named Henson to settle a gambling debt. That's why I ran. Preston's hands tightened on the reins. He sold you, he said flatly, anger evident in his voice. In effect, Whiskey agreed. Henson is 30 years my senior, twice widowed with a reputation for cruelty. When I refused, my uncle locked me in my room until I came to my senses. I escaped through the window one night and fled west. And now he's found you. Preston's jaw was set in a hard line. Yes. Whiskey stared at her hands, clenched tightly in her lap. I need to leave Redemption Creek, tonight if possible. No, Preston said firmly. Whiskey looked up in surprise. No, running won't solve this, Whiskey. He found you once, he can find you again. Preston turned to meet her gaze, his eyes fierce in the moonlight. You have a life here now, children who depend on you, friends who care about you. I've been here barely 2 weeks, Whiskey protested. Long enough to make an impression, Preston replied. Long enough for people to want to stand with you. You don't understand, Whiskey said, frustration edging her voice. My uncle won't just give up and go home, and if Henson comes... She shuddered. He's not a man who takes rejection well. Then we'll deal with him too, Preston said with quiet confidence. This is Montana territory, Whiskey. We handle our problems differently here than in St. Louis. As they crested the hill overlooking Redemption Creek, the small town came into view, lights twinkling in windows. It looked peaceful, untouched by the trouble Whiskey had brought with her. I don't want anyone hurt because of me, she said softly. Preston reached over and covered her hand with his own. Some things are worth fighting for. The warmth of his hand, the conviction in his voice, they steadied her, even as her fear remained. By the time they reached town, Whiskey had made a decision. She wouldn't run, not yet. But she would face her uncle on her terms, not his. The sheriff's office was lit when they arrived in town. Preston helped Whiskey down from the wagon, his hand lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. The touch gave her courage as they entered the small building. Sheriff Markham, a grizzled veteran of the frontier, looked up from his desk. Seated across from him was a well-dressed man in his 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. Edmund Larson. Whiskey, her uncle said, rising with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Thank God. I've been so worried. Whiskey remained near the door, Preston a solid presence beside her. Hello, Uncle. You needn't have troubled yourself. As you can see, I'm perfectly well. Edmund's gaze flickered to Preston, then back to his niece. You disappeared without a word. What was I to think? Perhaps that I had no desire to marry Mr. Henson, Whiskey replied coolly. The sheriff cleared his throat. This is a family matter, then? Yes, Edmund said quickly. No, Whiskey countered. My uncle arranged a marriage for me without my consent, to a man who paid him handsomely for the privilege. When I refused, I was confined against my will. I left legally, of my own accord, as an adult woman with the right to determine her own future. Edmund's pleasant mask slipped slightly. You're being dramatic, my dear. Mr. Henson is a respectable businessman who would provide well for you. Your reluctance is merely youthful rebellion. Mr. Larson, Preston interjected, his voice level but with an undercurrent of steel. Your niece has established herself here. She's our school teacher, respected by the community. Whatever arrangements you made in St. Louis have no bearing here. Edmund assessed Preston with cold eyes. And you are Preston Hayes. I own the Hayes Ranch north of town and sit on the town council and school board. Ah. Edmund's smile was calculating. And you've taken an interest in my niece's welfare. How? Gallant. The insinuation was clear, and Whiskey felt her cheeks flush with anger. My uncle is leaving on tomorrow's stage, Sheriff, she said firmly. There's nothing more to discuss. Edmund's expression hardened. I've come a long way, Whiskey. The least you can do is speak with me privately before dismissing me so abruptly." Whiskey hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse outright, but she knew her uncle well enough to understand he wouldn't leave without having his say. 10 minutes, she conceded. "At my cottage, with the sheriff present." Edmund raised an eyebrow. "Surely we don't need official supervision for a family conversation." "Those are my terms," Whiskey said flatly. "Very well," Edmund agreed with a tight smile. "Lead the way." The walk to Whiskey's cottage was tense, with Preston and the sheriff flanking her and Edmund following a few paces behind. Once inside, Whiskey lit the lamp but remained standing, unwilling to invite her uncle to make himself comfortable. "You have 10 minutes," she said. Edmund's pleasant facade dropped entirely once the door closed. "You've caused a great deal of trouble, Whiskey. Mr. Henson is not pleased." "I care nothing for Mr. Henson's pleasure," Whiskey replied. "I am not property to be bartered." "No, you're an ungrateful child who fails to appreciate the sacrifices made for you," Edmund snapped. "I took you in when your mother died, raised you as my own. This is how you repay me. By refusing to be sold to pay your gambling debts." Whiskey's voice rose despite her efforts to remain calm. "Yes, uncle, that's exactly how I repay you." Edmund's eyes narrowed. "You think you've escaped, but you haven't. Henson is a day behind me. He'll be here tomorrow or the next day, and he's bringing the paperwork you signed." Whiskey's heart stuttered. "I signed nothing." "Your signature on the marriage contract suggests otherwise," Edmund said with a cold smile. "Forged, of course, but who will know that here? A respected businessman from St. Louis, a signed contract against the word of a young woman who fled her legal guardian. Who do you think the law will believe?" Before Whiskey could respond, Preston stepped forward. "The law here knows Miss Larson. It doesn't know you or this Henson fellow. And contracts signed under duress or through forgery aren't worth the paper they're written on." "Stay out of this, Hayes," Edmund warned. "You have no idea what you're involving yourself in." "I know enough," Preston replied, his voice steady. "I know Whiskey is a grown woman making her own choices. I know she's chosen to build a life here, and I know this community protects its own." The sheriff nodded in agreement. "Mr. Larson, I suggest you take the morning stage back to wherever you came from. Tell your friend Henson not to bother making the trip." Edmund looked from the sheriff to Preston, then to Whiskey, his expression calculating. "This isn't over," he said finally. "Henson isn't a man who gives up easily." "Neither am I," Whiskey replied, finding strength in Preston's unwavering support. "Good night, Uncle. The stage leaves at 8. After Edmund and the sheriff had gone, Whiskey sank into a chair, the tension of the confrontation leaving her shaky. Preston knelt beside her, taking her trembling hands in his. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "He's not bluffing about the forged contract," Whiskey said. "Henson has connections in St. Louis judges, politicians. If he comes with papers that appear legal—" "Then we'll fight it," Preston said firmly. "Sheriff Markham already sent a telegram to the territorial governor. He owes me a favor from the Indian troubles last year. By the time Henson arrives, if he dares to come at all, we'll have legal protection in place for you." Whiskey looked into his earnest blue eyes, overwhelmed by his determination to protect her. "Why are you doing this? You barely know me." Preston's gaze held her steadily. "I know enough," he said simply. "I know you're brave and kind. I know you connect with children in a way that's rare. I know that when you smile, really smile, it lights up your whole face." His voice softened. "And I know that from the moment I found you on that road, I haven't been able to stop thinking about you." Whiskey's breath caught. "Preston, you don't need to say anything," he assured her quickly. "This isn't the time, I understand that. I just want you to know why I'm standing with you. It's not obligation or chivalry. It's because I see you, Whiskey Larson. I see your strength and your fear and your beauty, not just the kind that shows on the outside, but the kind that comes from within." Tears welled in Whiskey's eyes. No one had ever seen her so clearly or spoken to her with such honest emotion. "I don't know what to say." Preston smiled gently. "You don't have to say anything. Just know that you're not alone in this fight." He rose, reluctantly releasing her hands. "I should go. Sheriff Markham is posting a deputy outside tonight just to be safe." "Thank you," Whiskey said, standing as well. "For everything." At the door, Preston turned back. "Try to rest. Tomorrow after school, come out to the ranch. You'll be safer there until this is resolved." After he left, Whiskey moved about her small cottage, preparing for bed with mechanical motions while her mind raced. Preston's words echoed in her thoughts, warming her despite the threat her uncle represented. For the first time since fleeing St. Louis, she felt truly seen and valued for who she was. As she blew out the lamp and settled under her quilt, Whiskey made a decision. She would not allow her uncle or Henson to dictate her future any longer. Here in Redemption Creek, she had found not just sanctuary but the beginning of a life worth fighting for. The morning stage departed at 8 as scheduled, with Edmund Larson aboard. Whiskey watched from the schoolhouse steps, Preston at her side, as the coach disappeared in a cloud of dust. But there was no sense of relief, only the knowledge that a greater confrontation approached. "Will you be all right today?" Preston asked, his concern evident. "I have 30 children counting on me to teach them," Whiskey replied with more confidence than she felt. "I won't let them down." Preston nodded, understanding the determination behind her words. "I'll be back at 3 to take you to the ranch." The school day passed in a blur of lessons and children's voices. Whiskey threw herself into teaching, finding solace in the familiar routine. But beneath her calm exterior, anxiety simmered. Each time the schoolhouse door opened, her heart jumped, expecting to see Henson's imposing figure. At 3, Preston arrived as promised. The children had gone, and Whiskey was gathering papers to grade. He entered quietly, hat in hand, his expression grave. "Henson arrived on the noon stage," he said without preamble. "He's at the hotel with a man he claims is his lawyer." Whiskey's hand stilled. "Have they shown the forged contract?" "Not yet." "They're meeting with Sheriff Markham and Judge Wilson now." Preston moved closer. "The telegram from the governor arrived this morning. You're under territorial protection pending a full investigation of any claims against you." Relief flooded through her, but it was tempered by caution. "That won't stop Henson." "No," Preston agreed, "but it buys us time and legal standing." He held out his hand. "Are you ready to go? William and Hank are waiting with the wagon. We thought a show of force might be prudent." Whiskey gathered her things quickly, then hesitated. "My revolver," she said. "In the drawer by my bed. I should bring it." Preston's eyebrows rose, but he didn't question her. "I'll get it." Minutes later, they left the schoolhouse through the back door. William Hayes and Hank were waiting with a wagon, rifles across their laps. They nodded grimly to Whiskey as Preston helped her aboard. "Clara's looking forward to having company," William said conversationally, as though they weren't essentially smuggling her out of town. "She's been embroidering baby clothes all day and needs someone to admire her handiwork." The casual normality of his comment made Whiskey smile despite her tension. "I'd be happy to oblige." They took a circuitous route out of town, avoiding the main street where the hotel stood. But as they passed the church, a figure stepped into the road, forcing William to rein in the horses. Augustus Henson was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his 50s, expensively dressed and radiating authority. His sharp eyes fixed on Whiskey, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. "Miss Larson," he called. "Or should I say Mrs. Henson? The paperwork indicates we've been married for over a month." Preston jumped down from the wagon, positioning himself between Whiskey and Henson. "Move aside, sir. You're blocking the road." "I'm claiming what's legally mine," Henson replied, his voice deceptively pleasant. "My wife seems to have wandered off before our union could be properly consummated." William raised his rifle slightly. "That's enough of that kind of talk. The lady isn't going anywhere with you." Henson's smile didn't waver. "The lady signed a marriage contract. Judge Wilson is reviewing it now. By this evening, he'll issue an order compelling her to fulfill her legal obligations." "Forgery isn't legal," Whiskey said, finding her voice at last. "And neither is forcing a woman into marriage against her will." "Prove it's forgery," Henson challenged. "Your uncle witnessed your signature." "My lawyer has affidavits from respected citizens of St. Louis attesting to our engagement. It's your word against substantial evidence, my dear." A crowd had begun to gather, drawn by the confrontation. Whiskey saw Mrs. Pemberton among them, watching with avid interest. Violet stood nearby, her expression concerned. "This is neither the time nor place for this discussion," Preston said firmly. "If you have legal claims, present them through proper channels. Meanwhile, Miss Larson remains free to go where she pleases." "She's my wife," Henson insisted, his voice hardening. "And I'll not have her living under another man's roof, Hayes. Your reputation in this matter is already compromised." The implication drew murmurs from the gathering crowd. Whiskey felt a flash of anger at the way Henson was manipulating the situation, using the town's conservative values against her. "Mr. Henson," she said clearly, standing in the wagon so everyone could see her, "I am not your wife. I never agreed to marry you. Any document bearing my signature is a forgery created by my uncle to settle his gambling debts to you." Henson's expression darkened. "Be careful, Whiskey. Slander is a serious offense." "So is forgery," she retorted. "And coercion and false imprisonment, all things you and my uncle are guilty of." "You ungrateful girl," Henson snarled, his pleasant facade cracking. "After all your uncle and I have done for you, done for me," Whiskey interrupted, her voice rising with indignation. "You mean selling me like cattle, locking me in my room when I refused, tracking me across half the country to force me into a marriage I never consented to." The crowd's murmurs grew louder, and Whiskey saw several people exchange troubled glances. Even Mrs. Pemberton looked disturbed by Henson's behavior. "This is absurd," Henson said, regaining his composure. "The girl is clearly unbalanced. Her uncle warned me about her flights of fancy." "I believe Miss Larson," Preston said firmly. His declaration hung in the air, a challenge to anyone who might doubt her. "As do I," came another voice. Reverend Thomas stepped forward from the crowd. "I've seen Miss Larson with our children. She is neither unbalanced nor given to fantasy." "And I," added Dr. Morgan, joining the reverend. "Furthermore, I would be interested to examine this so-called marriage contract. As a notary public for the territory, I'm familiar with the legal requirements for such documents." One by one, townspeople stepped forward, parents of Whiskey's students, shopkeepers she had patronized, even Violet's mother who had hosted her for Sunday dinner. Each declared their belief in her character and truthfulness. Henson looked increasingly uncomfortable as the community rallied around Whiskey. His confident demeanor slipped further when Sheriff Markham appeared, a telegram in hand. "Mr. Henson," the sheriff called, pushing through the crowd. "Just received this from the circuit judge in Helena. He's ordered all documents related to your claim be sent to him for review. Meanwhile, Miss Larson remains under territorial protection." Henson's face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous." "I have rights, so does Miss Larson," Sheriff Markham interrupted. And right now, those include not being harassed in the street by a man waving questionable paperwork. He gestured to his deputy. Escort Mr. Henson back to the hotel. He's not to approach Miss Larson until this matter is legally resolved. As Henson was led away, still protesting, the tension in Whiskey's body released so suddenly she felt lightheaded. Preston was at her side instantly, steadying her. "Let's get you to the ranch," he said softly. "You're safe now." The crowd dispersed slowly, many stopping to offer words of support to Whiskey. Even Mrs. Pemberton approached, her usual haughty demeanor subdued. "Miss Larson," she said stiffly, "I may have misjudged the situation and you." With that cryptic statement, she turned and walked away. By the time they reached the Hayes Ranch, the sun was setting. Clara welcomed Whiskey with open arms, as though she were family returning home rather than a virtual stranger seeking refuge. "You'll stay in the guest room next to mine," she declared. "That way I'll have company during the day while the men are working." The next several days fell into a routine. Preston drove Whiskey to the schoolhouse each morning and brought her back to the ranch each afternoon. Sheriff Markham kept Henson under close observation, preventing him from approaching Whiskey or the school. On the fourth day, as they rode back to the ranch, Preston broke their comfortable silence. "The circuit judge will be here tomorrow. He'll hear Henson's claim and your refutation." Whiskey nodded, her stomach tightening with anxiety. What if the judge believes him? The forged contract, the witnesses. The governor himself vouched for Judge Reynolds' integrity, Preston assured her. He'll see through Henson's deception. And if he doesn't, Whiskey couldn't help asking. Preston's jaw set in a determined line. "Then we'll appeal, and if that fails..." He hesitated, then continued more softly, "There are other solutions." "What do you mean?" He guided the wagon around a bend in the road before answering. "A married woman can't be compelled to marry another man." Whiskey's heart skipped a beat. "Preston, are you suggesting it wouldn't be just for convenience?" he said quickly, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Though I'd understand if that's all you wanted, but I meant what I said before. From the moment I found you on that road, I knew you were different, special." "You'd marry me to protect me from Henson?" Whiskey asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Preston finally looked at her, his blue eyes intense. "I'd marry you because I'm falling in love with you, Whiskey Larson. Henson is just the excuse for speaking my heart sooner than I might have otherwise." Whiskey's breath caught. In the short time she'd known him, Preston Hayes had shown her more genuine care and respect than she'd experienced in years with her uncle. She'd felt drawn to him from the beginning, his quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, the way his serious expression transformed when he smiled. But love, was that what she was feeling? The warmth that spread through her when he was near, the sense of safety and belonging she found in his presence? "You don't have to answer now," Preston said into her silence. "It's a lot to consider, especially with everything else you're facing." "It is," Whiskey agreed. "But that doesn't mean I haven't been considering it already." Preston's hands tightened on the reins. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I care for you too, Preston, more than I thought possible in such a short time." She took a deep breath. "If the judge rules against me tomorrow, I would be honored to become your wife. But not as a last resort or an escape, only if we both truly want it, for the right reasons." The smile that spread across Preston's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I want it for all the right reasons, Whiskey. And a few selfish ones too, like waking up to your smile every morning and hearing your laugh every day." His words painted a picture of a future Whiskey hadn't dared to imagine for herself, one filled with joy and companionship rather than obligation and constraint. For the first time since leaving St. Louis, she allowed herself to hope. The next morning dawned clear and crisp. The circuit judge had arrived late the previous night and would hold court in the church at 10 o'clock. Whiskey dressed with care in her best dress, a deep green that brought out the gold in her hair. Preston waited for her on the porch, looking handsome and solemn in a clean shirt and vest. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. "As I'll ever be," she replied, taking it. The church was packed when they arrived. It seemed the entire town had turned out to witness the proceedings. Henson sat at a table near the front with his lawyer and, to Whiskey's dismay, her uncle. Edmund's face was expressionless as she walked past. Judge Reynolds, a distinguished man with silver hair and piercing gray eyes, called the court to order. He explained that this was not a formal trial but a hearing to determine the validity of the marriage contract Henson had presented. Henson's lawyer spoke first, presenting the document in question, an official-looking paper bearing what appeared to be Whiskey's signature. He called Edmund to testify to witnessing the signing, then presented affidavits from several St. Louis citizens affirming Whiskey and Henson's engagement. When it was Whiskey's turn, she approached the front with Preston at her side. The judge had agreed to allow him to speak on her behalf, given her limited legal knowledge. "Miss Larson," Judge Reynolds began, "do you deny signing this contract?" "I do, Your Honor," Whiskey replied firmly. "That is not my signature." "Can you prove it?" Preston stepped forward. "Your Honor, we've brought samples of Miss Larson's actual handwriting letters she's written, school records she's kept since arriving in Redemption Creek. You'll see the signature on the contract doesn't match." The judge examined the documents carefully, comparing them to the contract. "There are discrepancies," he acknowledged, "but handwriting can vary based on circumstances." "There's more, Your Honor," Preston continued. "Miss Larson was physically confined by her uncle when this contract was supposedly signed. We have witness testimony to that effect." A murmur ran through the crowd as Violet Morgan stood. "Your Honor, I received a letter from my cousin in St. Louis 2 months ago. She mentioned that Edmund Larson had locked his niece in her room after she refused a marriage arrangement. The entire neighborhood knew of it." "Hearsay," Henson's lawyer objected. "I have the letter," Violet countered, producing it from her reticule. The judge read it carefully. "This corresponds with the timeline Miss Larson has described." He turned to Edmund. "Mr. Larson, did you confine your niece to her room?" Edmund shifted uncomfortably. "She was hysterical. It was for her own protection." "And did you forge her signature on this contract?" the judge pressed. "Absolutely not," Edmund declared, though his eyes slid away from the judge's piercing gaze. "Your Honor," Preston interjected, "there's another witness who can speak to Mr. Larson's character and truthfulness in this matter." At his signal, the church door opened and a small, neat woman in her 40s entered. Whiskey gasped in recognition. Mrs. Finch, her uncle's housekeeper. Edmund's face paled. "What is she doing here?" "Mrs. Finch arrived on yesterday's stage," Preston explained, "at our invitation." The housekeeper approached the front, her expression determined. "Your Honor, I've worked for Mr. Larson for 15 years. I was there the night Miss Whiskey escaped. I was also there when Mr. Larson and Mr. Henson created that contract, a week after she was gone." "You saw them forge the signature?" the judge asked. "With my own eyes," Mrs. Finch confirmed. "Mr. Larson practiced copying it from her letters until he got it right. Then Mr. Henson dated it from before she left." "That's a lie," Edmund shouted, rising to his feet. "She was dismissed for theft." "She's not a credible witness." "I was dismissed for refusing to lie about Miss Whiskey's whereabouts," Mrs. Finch corrected calmly. "I have references from my previous employer of 10 years that speak to my character." Judge Reynolds considered all the evidence in silence, the tension in the church building with each passing moment. Finally, he looked up. "Based on the evidence presented, I find the marriage contract between Augustus Henson and Whiskey Larson to be fraudulent and therefore null and void." He banged his gavel as excited whispers broke out. "Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the federal prosecutor for possible charges of forgery and fraud against Edmund Larson and Augustus Henson." Relief washed over Whiskey in a dizzying wave. Preston's hand found hers, squeezing gently in silent celebration. "This is an outrage," Henson bellowed, surging to his feet. "I paid good money for that girl." His words, spoken in anger, confirmed everything Whiskey had claimed. The crowd's whispers turned to outright murmurs of disgust. "Mr. Henson," Judge Reynolds said coldly, "you've just admitted to attempting to purchase a human being, which has been illegal in this country for some years now. I suggest you and Mr. Larson leave Redemption Creek immediately, before I decide to have you both arrested where you stand." Sheriff Markham stepped forward, hand on his gun. "I'd be happy to escort them to the afternoon stage, Your Honor." As her uncle and Henson were led away, Whiskey felt as though a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The nightmare that had followed her from St. Louis was finally over. Preston turned to her, his eyes shining with joy and something deeper. "It's over," he said softly. "You're free, Whiskey, truly free." "Thanks to you," she replied, overwhelmed with gratitude. "If you hadn't found me on that road—" "If I hadn't found you, someone else would have," Preston said. "But I'm mighty glad it was me." People surrounded them then, offering congratulations and support. Through it all, Preston kept her hand in his, a silent promise of what was to come. That evening they sat on the porch of the Hayes Ranch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. Clara and William had tactfully left them alone, taking the children inside for bedtime stories. "What happens now?" Whiskey asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "I should move back to my cottage, I suppose." "Is that what you want?" Preston's voice was gentle. Whiskey considered the question seriously. "I want to keep teaching. The children need me and I need them." "And beyond that," Preston prompted. She turned to look at him, this man who had become so important to her in such a short time. "I want to build a life here, a real life with roots and connections. I've never had that before." Preston took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Would that life have room in it for me?" "It wouldn't be the life I want without you in it," Whiskey admitted softly. The smile that spread across Preston's face was like sunlight breaking through clouds. "I meant what I said yesterday. I'm falling in love with you, Whiskey Larson. I think I started falling the moment I saw you on that road, filthy and defiant and more beautiful than anything I'd ever seen." Whiskey laughed. "I was a mess." "You were magnificent," Preston corrected. "Brave enough to leave everything behind and start over. Strong enough to face down your uncle and Henson." His expression softened. "And gentle enough to earn the trust of 30 children and one stubborn rancher." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object that caught the last rays of the setting sun. A ring, a simple gold band with a small, perfect diamond. "This was my mother's," Preston said. "My father gave it to her when they decided to homestead here, before Montana was even a territory. It's seen hard times and good times, drought and plenty. Through it all, it's been a symbol of a love that endures." He held it out to her. "Whiskey Larson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because you need protection, but because I love you and hope you might come to love me too." Tears welled in Whiskey's eyes. "I already do," she whispered. "Love you, that is. It happened so quickly I hardly recognized it, but it's there all the same." "Is that a yes?" Preston asked, his voice husky with emotion. "Yes," Whiskey said, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "Yes, I'll marry you, Preston Hayes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then cupped her face gently in his hands. "May I kiss you, Miss Larson? For the first time, but not the last." In answer, Whiskey leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tender at first, then deepened as Preston pulled her closer. When they finally parted, both breathless, the stars had begun to appear in the darkening sky. "I should tell you," Preston said, his forehead resting against hers, "that being a rancher's wife isn't easy. There will be hard times, long hours, worry when the weather turns or the market falls." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Whiskey replied, "and worry is easier to bear when it's shared." Preston smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Clara will be thrilled. She's been hoping for a sister since the day William brought her home." "And the town?" Whiskey couldn't help asking. "Mrs. Pemberton and the others. After today, I think even Mrs. Pemberton will come around," Preston assured her. "And if she doesn't, well, the Hayes family has been in Redemption Creek longer than the Pembertons. We can weather a little disapproval." They were married 2 weeks later in the same church where Whiskey had been freed from her uncle's machinations. Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony, beaming as he pronounced them husband and wife. Clara, now confined to bed until the baby's arrival, hosted the celebration at the ranch afterward. As night fell and guests began to depart, Preston led Whiskey away from the festivities to a spot behind the barn where they could see the stars emerging in the vast Montana sky. "Happy, Mrs. Hayes?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Whiskey replied, leaning back against his solid chest. "I came west looking for escape, but I found so much more." "A home," Preston murmured, his lips brushing her temple. "Yes," she agreed. "A home, a purpose, and a love I never expected." She turned in his arms to face him. "Do you know what I thought that first night when you found me on the road? That I was annoyingly persistent," Preston guessed with a smile. Whiskey laughed. "Well, yes, that too. But mostly I thought no one would ever see past the dirt and desperation to the woman underneath." She reached up to touch his face. "But you did. You saw me, Preston, all of me." "I still do," he whispered, lowering his head to kiss her, "and I always will." 3 years later, Whiskey stood on the porch of the Hayes Ranch, watching as Preston rode in from checking the herd. Their 2-year-old daughter, Hope, played at her feet, while their infant son, James, slept in her arms. Preston dismounted with the easy grace that still made her heart skip, even after 3 years of marriage. He swept Hope up as she ran to him, her blonde curls bouncing, then climbed the steps to kiss his wife. "How are my 3 favorite people?" he asked, his eyes the same clear blue their daughter had inherited crinkling at the corners. "Waiting for you," Whiskey replied with a smile. "Clara and William are bringing the children for dinner. The new school teacher is coming too. She has questions about next term." Preston nodded, adjusting sleeping James's blanket. "Good, we should make her feel welcome." "The way you welcomed me," Whiskey teased. "I didn't do nearly enough," Preston said, his expression softening as he looked at her. "If I had, you might not have been so afraid to trust me at first." "I wasn't afraid of you," Whiskey corrected. "I was afraid of what you made me feel. After everything with my uncle and Henson, I didn't trust my own judgment." Preston wrapped his free arm around her, creating a circle that enclosed their children. "And now I know it was the best judgment I ever made," she said simply. "Trusting you, loving you, building this life with you." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the ranch in golden light, Whiskey thought about how far she had come from that dusty, desperate woman on the road to Redemption Creek. She had found not just safety but joy, not just escape but purpose. And it had all begun with a moment of kindness when a serious-eyed cowboy had looked beyond her filthy exterior and seen the beauty within.